You're listening to the Journey to Launch podcast, how Kerry Ann found joy, wealth, and freedom on her journey to financial independence.
T-minus 10 seconds.
Welcome to the Journey to Launch podcast with your host, Jamila Souffrant. As a money expert who walks her talk, she helps brave journeyers like you get out of debt, save, invest, and build real wealth. Join her on the journey to launch to financial freedom in
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, journeyers. Super excited to have you joining me for this podcast episode. I'm so excited to have today's guest on the show. Now, you know I love talking to different types of people, different people on the journey at different points. Some of my favorite interviews are of people who have actually reached financial independence, because so many of us want to achieve that. So many of us are still on that journey. So what does a life of financial independence look like? What does it look like for someone who was able to retire early? And I have a story for you. So I'm going to be talking with Kerry Ann, who was able to retire early with her husband. And you'll hear how she did it, how she started the journey, how through a few years build up their portfolio, their businesses, their income to really create this life where they could reach financial independence. I love how Kerry Ann talks about her day, what it's like now that she's reached financial independence, about the real key factors that allowed her to reach it. And so I know you're going to get a lot from this interview. Now, before we hop right in, I want to say that I could not get into everything I wanted to with Kerry Ann. We had but so much time. I wanted to be respectful of that. But I could have talked to her for hours, and you're going to hear that in the interview. But what I'm excited to share with you is that Kerry Ann will be in the Journeyer Launch Club. So that's my membership community where I'm able to dive deeper with podcast topics, with guests, with just overall content for the podcast. And so Kerry Ann is going to join us in the Launch Club to do a live after show with us to discuss her story a bit more, answer some questions for journeyers in the community. So if that's something that sounds amazing to you, I hope it does, then come on, join us in the Launch Club. You can join us at journeytolaunch.com/launch club. Kerry Ann will be joining us on the 22nd. Also, we have some exciting programming in the Launch Club coming up this month and some other stuff. So I'll wait until the end of the interview to talk about that a bit more. But come join us in the Launch Club. It's where we really are able to support you on your journey to financial independence and freedom. And so you can find more information at journeytolaunch.com/launch club. Okay, so with Kerry Ann, this episode is episode 80. If you want any of the episode show notes, you can go to journeytolaunch.com/episode 80. Also, if you are enjoying the podcast, enjoying this content, please don't forget to tell a friend to tell a friend. Let's get this information out there. Let's get your fellow friends, your family, whoever that you want on this journey with you. Let's send this to them so they can join you, right? So if you want to do that, just send them to journeytolaunch.com, at me, at them, and any post on any social media. Post it on your social media. Let me know what you thought about the episode. This is how we spread the word. As always, I'm Journey to Launch at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you want to at me, tag me, let me know what you thought of this conversation. Now, without further ado, let's hop into this amazing conversation with Kerry Ann. Hey, Journeyers. I'm really excited to have today's guest on the podcast, Kerry Ann Rockquemore. Hi, Kerry Ann.
Hi, how are you?
Good. And so I gave a little background of you before we started this separately, but I want to have you come in. I was so excited to get to talk to you because I saw you first on Instagram and went to your site, thebestchapter.com, and I was just amazed by the way you describe your journey, the fact that you are actually financially independent, and then the processes that you have created to basically get to where you are, and then review that. So you have this annual review that we'll get into, because I definitely want my journeyers, my people to get that and to hear that. But first of all, just welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the show. I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So what stood out the most? So I went through your site, and what I loved about it was I went to your About page, and you kind of listed, like obviously who you were, what you were about. But then you said, here is kind of a bit why I'm different than most fire bloggers. And I'm just going to list these things out. And I'm going to list these things out. And I want you to kind of, and that's how we're going to like dive deeper into your story. But you basically, you say, I'm a woman of color living in Detroit, not a white guy working in tech. You loved your job before you did retire early. And both you and your husband retired at the same time. So your retirement is not based on a spouse working and earning a 6-figure salary. And you had a couple more, but love that. So tell me a little bit more about yourself. So woman of color living in Detroit who loved their job. Like, how did you then, how did you get on this path to FI?
Well, it really started, I think probably lots of people have this moment, right? When you've been sleepwalking through life and through your finances, and then you wake up, right? And, my moment was in 1999. My husband and I had moved to Los Angeles. I had my first job after graduate school. And, we were both working professionals and, living in an awesome city. And then one day I went to pick my husband up, and I pulled up like I did every day. And he was standing outside with a big brown box. And I thought, oh, that's weird. And then the closer I got, the more I could see his face. He's typically a very affable person. He had this very stern look on his face. And he got in the car and threw the box in the back and said, "Just drive." And I thought, oh, Lord. And if you've ever had a brown box, you know what that means. He got fired. So we're driving home on the LA freeways. And I just remember this moment of like, wow, I feel terrible for him. And I want to be a good partner and be empathetic and really listen to what he's going through, because he's certainly never been fired from anything in his life. But I really couldn't concentrate because in my gut, I was absolutely panicking. Panicking about how on earth we were going to make it, how long we could make it without his paycheck, and also just this wave of shame. Here we were, two professionals with 5 degrees between us, and we were living check to check. And, I just didn't know how we were going to make it. And, it's a pretty awful moment, right? We got home and we just started to have some really candid conversation. And the realization we had from that moment was that, we can't allow ourselves to ever be in this situation again. And while we don't control everything in our lives, and there's plenty of things that we don't control, we do control our spending and we do control our saving. And so I think for us, that was, we just had a rude awakening. And everything, turned out okay. We got another job and everything was fine. But we weren't going to be the same after that. And so we really had to figure out, knowing absolutely nothing about finance, how are we going to learn and how are we going to get control of our money so that we never have to have a moment where I don't know how we're going to pay our bills.
Right. Now, so can I just jump in and ask what you guys did at that time as professions?
Sure. My husband was a consultant working at a large consulting firm, and I was a professor. So I had just gotten my first job out of graduate school, and I was an assistant professor at Pepperdine University in Malibu.
Nice. What were you teaching, or what did you teach?
I'm a sociologist by training, so I was teaching in a social science division.
Okay. All right. So then just to kind of go back and set the stage, you guys were living your best lives, it seems, in LA. And then the rug was basically pulled out from under your feet when your husband was fired. Mm-hmm. And so then what was the next step? So after that kind of like shame and that realization that you did not want to feel that way again, I know you said he got another job, but what was the next step in realizing, okay, like what did you do next to put yourself on this trajectory to actually be financially independent today?
Well, we started reading, right? And I think the book that changed things for us was Your Money or Your Life, which such a radical perspective for us, both in terms of kind of learn, the steps of that particular book, right? Like figuring out, what you really make and tracking your every penny. And most importantly, sitting down on a monthly basis and really asking yourself, like, is what I spent on any particular thing worth the life energy it cost me? Was it fulfilling, right? Is it aligned with my values? And if I didn't have to work, would I be doing this? Would I be spending on these things? Would I be living my life this way? And so I think for us, really, we didn't go much, we didn't really read anything else. We just read that book, and it's so rich. The steps are so, the process itself is so complex and so fruitful, right? It's like any process. You go through the steps, but it's really about how the process itself changes you. And we were very changed over time. And I think more than anything, a real pivot point for us was I got a different job in Boston, and we were part of, there was a Your Money or Your Life group, like a meetup group in Boston. And we met up once a month, and certainly it was lovely. We had a potluck and people shared, the tips and tricks and hacks and whatnot. But what mattered was that group had what they called accountability groups. So you could sign, if you had been doing at least 6 months of tracking, you could sign up for an accountability group. And the accountability groups required a 1-year commitment. It was 6 households, and we met face-to-face once a month, and every month, one household was on the hot seat. And that meant that everybody in the group went through your data, and everybody in the group asked you powerful questions about the gap between your data and your goals. And it was brutal. I either got pissed or cried every single time. But the reason I mention it is because, to state the obvious, I have the privilege of having a spouse. 2 people working on this can move faster than one. We ask each other powerful questions. But even in that situation, there's some questions you're not going to ask each other, right? There's some things that happen in a group. The group is really going to drill down and ask you the things you're just not going to ask each other. So I think for us, once we got into community, that changed everything. And it changed everything both because we could see actual real live people who were already retired. We could see a range of people by race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status in terms of their income, right? A lot of times we don't see people with lower incomes figuring out how to be financially independent. We saw people with all kinds of family structures, right? People with kids, without kids, single, married, divorced, widowed. It just was a really diverse group. And so being able to be in real community with other people, it really was the game changer for us.
I love that. And I'm nodding my head as you're talking because Vicki Robin, the author of the book, Your Money or Your Life, was on episode 39 of the podcast. And, she redid and had the book updated in 2018. So, that is also a book that a lot of people cite as a game changer for them, or the first time, especially if they've kind of been in the game for a little bit, like to this world. And what I love about where we come since that book has released is that, this online space, so the community is so important. And so the fact that now we're able to connect online is even better because, not necessarily everyone is going to have that in-person community they can go to. And then with podcasts and blogs and so many people sharing their perspectives, you're able to get that at least one, seeing someone else who maybe, you can relate to that looks like you doing something, which gives you the confidence that you can. And then being able to kind of join communities and kind of get into the mix where this kind of stuff at once, which you didn't even know existed or was not normal, becomes normal. So I love that. I love that you're mentioning that. So how long ago was this that you started to go to these groups and to really get into the groove of this?
I would say we had our turning point in 1999. We were in this group probably in 2000, 2001. So quite a long time ago.
Right. So my question here is, at that point, were you guys in a lot of debt? Were you kind of out of control with spending? What was your financial picture then?
Hot mess. Yeah, we were living above our means. We had $55,000 in student loan debt. We probably had another about 10 to 15 in just consumer debt on credit cards. And, we're just spending, right? Then once we started working through that process of your money, your life, there's nothing like tracking to raise your awareness. No matter, I think for lots of people, it's like, oh, I kind of know how I spend my money. Well, not really, because when you track your money, it's just like tracking your time. You think you know how you spend it, but there's just something amazing about data, right? And when you see the data of how you're actually spending it, it can be stunning and upsetting and shocking. And it's also an invitation, because it's just data, right? It doesn't have to mean anything. It's also an invitation to really see what can change here, right? It's an invitation to get creative about, how can I get the same outcome by doing something that doesn't cost as much? Or it is really an opportunity to just ask yourself, like, what the hell am I after, right? And a lot of times we're consuming things not for the thing, but for the feeling we get, right? And so, I think for us, just getting reflective and getting curious about how we were spending, looking at that data, analyzing the patterns, and really asking ourselves that most powerful question that took a really long time to sink in. If I didn't have to work, would I be doing this?
Mm-hmm. Right. So, okay. So you started tracking your spending, started to evaluate the data and make changes. How quickly from like the start of that did you start to dig yourself out of debt and do other things with your finances?
Yeah, it took us 2 years to get out of debt. It took us 2 years. And I think in that 2 years, we were really learning to live below our means while paying off debt, while becoming financially intelligent and getting our finances aligned with our values. And I have to be honest, it was really thrilling to get out of debt. And it was simultaneously a little depressing, right? Because I remember because our accountability group in Boston kind of threw a party for us, right? And I can remember eating the cupcake because they wanted us to celebrate, getting out of debt. It's a big accomplishment. And I can remember eating my cupcake and being mad because, it's a huge accomplishment. I'm so glad I did it. I never thought I could. And yet now I'm starting from almost zero, right? And I'm glad I said something in the moment, because the person in our group was like, all of those strategies that you use to get out of debt are about to become the turbo booster of your wealth, right?
Yeah.
All that discipline, all of the conscious decision making, all of that's going to start now building your wealth. And you're going to be amazed at how much more quickly things accumulate now that you're not weighted down by this debt, right? Mm-hmm. So then we started building. And honestly, it took us 15 years from the start to actually hitting the number we had set for ourselves. And by the time that we did that, we weren't ready to retire. So we kept working for another 3 years, and we just retired last year.
At how old?
46.
46.
We're both the same age, yeah.
Okay, that's, awesome. All right, I want to step back a bit. So you talk about getting out of debt in 2 years and then using the same sort of discipline and strategies to then build wealth and grow your investments. Did you like after tracking, like what were the steps? Did you like stop going out to eat? Were you very frugal? Did you focus on increasing income? What were the major triggers and levers that you pulled to get to these goals?
So I'm not super great at the frugal part. So
love that. A lot of people aren't. You know what? I love that you said that because I'm not that frugal either, honestly. And so love that you said that. So sorry, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate the people who eat the brown bananas and they're couponing and doing all these things. It's just, I think just naturally more focused on how do I increase my income. And I suppose it's also a form of privilege to be able, because of my education, because of my professional experience, and because I'm part of a couple with a lot of education and a lot of professional experience, that it just feels easier to me to be able to focus on more money coming in than it is to get down into the minutia of detail of like, you know, putting my soaps together at the end of one bar and the beginning of another. So for me, the frugal piece has never been a huge emphasis. We were much more interested in how do we generate more income. And so for us, what that looked like, I should say once we got out of debt, our biggest dream was that we would be able to live on one person's salary, right? So we weren't kind of in it from the beginning to retire early because that felt like way too big of a thing. Even though we saw people doing it, this was so far outside of how we grew up and felt, I don't know, it felt possible, but we needed something, a smaller goal to work towards. So our big dream was that we could live on one salary. And you know, we had a unique situation that I was a professor. So basically, when we ask ourselves this question about if we didn't have to work, would we be doing what we're doing? I was like, yes, I love teaching, and I would teach even if I wasn't paid for it because I just love teaching, and I am a teacher who I am in the world. My husband, not so much. If he didn't have to work, he wouldn't be a consultant. So because I was a professor and because I had the opportunity to win tenure, which means having a, you know, set salary for life, we really leaned into me winning tenure and also working so that we could live off my salary. And so we hit a point where my husband quit his job and we lived off my salary. And it was interesting. It was like a really great time in my life because our agreement was that if we lived off my salary, that he was 100% in charge of all household labor. So it was amazing because all I had to do was go to work, and he took care of everything around the house, did all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the everything. And of course, our life was so greatly enhanced because when I came home from work, the house smelled like fresh baked bread and there was homemade food. So we were eating better and the house was clean, and he was reading and writing poetry, and he's quite a Renaissance man. So he had plenty of interesting things to talk about. It was great. It was really what we had dreamed of. And then, of course, as often happens, your dreams get bigger, right? Because I saw how he was living, and I thought, at the same time I was getting disenchanted and kind of outgrowing my job. So really, I wanted to also be retired, and it now seemed possible. And, we suddenly started to realize, yeah, we could both do this, but it's going to take something different.
So at that point, how far into the journey that you started to want to live off one income were you able to accomplish that?
Probably about 7 years.
7 years. Now, were you able to still invest aggressively and save at that point that you did that? Or was it primarily okay?
We did, not at a high rate, but we were able to invest. And at that point, we were living in Chicago, so we also had a row house with a downstairs apartment. So we also had the benefit of having a renter living in our building.
Mm-hmm. So you basically also were able to hack one of the most expensive points of anyone's budget is housing to save money.
Yes.
Right, which is key. So I love that you talk about how your goals change and evolve, because that is really important. Same thing happened to me, I'd say, is, I recently quit my job. It's a bit different. So I quit my job. My husband is working. He's a teacher. We're living off of his income, but his income doesn't cover everything. And so I saved up a buffer amount to help kind of bridge that gap until I started making money through my entrepreneurial pursuits. But the plan is still to reach financial independence and then decide what we want to do from there. He likes his job, so he thinks he's going to stay working. But, who knows, right? Like, who knows what happens,
right.
Hopefully in 5 to 10 years, if we're able to accomplish like this, maybe he will have, the options will open up so much more that he may want to quit. I don't know. So I love that you talk about, you started to dream a bit bigger as you got along in the journey.
Yeah. And what became clear was, for both of us to do this, we spent 2 years sort of living that way, right? With me working and, him working, doing the labor of the household. I don't want to make that sound like it's not work, but doing the unpaid labor of the house. So when we started to dream bigger, we were like, okay, well, we're going to need to do things differently in order to set both of us free. And so at that point, he started a business, and he started a business, and I got to watch what it looks like for someone to just out of the blue start a business. And what was interesting is that he was suddenly making a lot more money than he ever was working for somebody else, but he had complete autonomy and flexibility over his time. And that looked really attractive to me. So maybe a year later, I quit my tenure track job, which is unheard of, to start a business. And I had watched him do it. So I felt like if he can do that, I can also do that. And so I started a business. And as it turned out, we were both pretty good at starting businesses.
Running. So I'm curious, I'm assuming his it was probably based around what he did previously, or was this a totally different skill set in business? Okay.
No, exact same skill set, just doing it for himself under his own umbrella.
Right. And I'm amazed. I mean, I love that you did bring up privilege before, because there is a level of privilege here with the kind of education and skill set that you guys had to be able to like do that. I mean, and the confidence level, right? Like first you had to believe you two could do this, but I think you guys were set up really nicely to take these kind of jumps and pivots in your life. But then that's not to take away from even that you did it, because there are a lot of people who are in your positions, but who would never take that leap.
Yeah. And also, let me add one more, which is we often don't consider our network part of that privilege, right? But it is, right? Because it's also, when you start a business, it's also about, do you know other people who started businesses, right? Do you have people that you can call when you have questions and concerns? Do you have a Rolodex of clients? Right, of potential clients. All those things are also, I think we don't always acknowledge that that's a benefit, right? And it doesn't mean that I don't certainly know people who have started businesses without those things, but let's be real also that makes it easier.
Right. And can I say this, and I understand if it's like a sensitive topic, but also it seems that you guys have done this without kids?
Yes.
So
and that's,
yeah, we don't have to get into why or whatever, but I would assume that too, like not having children also affects it. I mean, I have 3 kids, so our journeys are definitely, my husband and I, like the way we think about our money and putting things away from them, it impacts our journey to financial independence too.
Yeah, I mean, in ways that I can only imagine, right? Because I don't face, again, I just think it's important to acknowledge, like, it's a completely different life experience, but also different sets of questions that go along with it, right? Anything that he and I are deciding, the consequences are for the two of us, right? Any choices that we're making, any risks that we're taking, they're going to be different for two people than they are for one person with children or two people with children, or even, one person with elder care that is significant. So again, I think sometimes people get a lot of energy around this instead of just saying, hey, let's talk about what's real for us, right? And what it's okay to acknowledge these things without it being
an attack on your what you've been able to accomplish. Yeah, no, I totally get it. And I think too, I think we can all learn from each other's journeys. Like, they don't have to look exactly the same. And so, maybe there are some differences in our starting points, or there's some differences in like our the factors, kids or no kids, single or not. But I think what it comes down to though is the skill sets, which again can be different depending on your educational background and family background, and even your socioeconomic background. But I think if you have a growth mindset, like these skill sets that you see in other people that you admire, you can also develop. And so, becoming, better, whatever subject matter you're in, right? Or whether career you choose, becoming better in that, becoming a better people person, having that social intelligence to be able to network, all those things you can improve upon to help increase your chances of reaching financial freedom.
Yeah, and I love sort of the thinking about the skill sets, right? Because it is also, if you have a growth mindset, it's also true that you can learn skill sets, right? As you said. So, for my husband, he didn't have to acquire a huge number of skills to start his business. The difference for me is that I had always been an educator. I had always been a professor. I had never even really worked in a business, much less started a company. And I did have to acquire a number of skills in order to be able to do that, right? But those skills are not, those skills are achievable, right? You can learn them. They are acquirable. And being able to learn those, frankly, building the company was this was one of the biggest growth periods of my life, is just shifting from the mindset of being a teacher to the mindset of being an entrepreneur. And it frankly was the hardest thing that I've done.
And so one of the blog posts that you have, and I will try to link every one of the blog posts that we mentioned here, is that you talk about you quit your job. So you reach financial independence and you quit. Not only did you quit your tenured, safe teaching job, professor job, you started this business which did really well, and you also walked away from that to actually retire early, which a lot of people actually don't do. So in this space, you'll see people who enjoy their work or don't enjoy their work, and even if they hit their financial independence number, they still continue to actively work. And so can you define kind of what financial independence means for you? Are you actually living off of your investments? Do you bring in money, the both of you? How does that look?
Yeah, we live off our investments. And, for us, I don't think I'm not part of the retirement police that you have to have X, Y, and Z indicators in order to, legit be retired. But for what it means for us is that we're not working for pay. And, that's the ability to do that, to hit that sort of crossover point. That for us feels like freedom. Now, even as much as I loved my job, right? And I really did.
But you had the options, to explore and do things the way you want to. So can I get more technical about just like
Sure.
what that looks like? Because I think what a lot of people love, like when they hear stories like this, is
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, like you can actually, save enough money to like live off of
Yes.
that money. But how does that look? Is it through is it through your real estate investments? I'm not sure if you have a portfolio. Is it through your like actually like index investing? Is it through your actual retirement accounts? What does that look like, that portfolio?
Yeah, for us, we have a wealth account, and it's heavy. We have a heavy bond portfolio, which I realize many people find ridiculous in its conservative nature, but it is reliable interest, and we live off that interest. Mm-hmm. We have a little bit of real estate, but nothing significant. That's really our core thing.
Right. Now, is most of that invested in like non-retirement accounts? Because that's the other question people have is like when you first start, you want to be tax optimized. You want to, you're pulling a lot of money into your maybe retirement accounts, your 401k and your Roth IRAs. And then the question becomes, but if I retire early, then I'm not able to directly access that money necessarily without penalty. So then you're taught to invest in non-retirement accounts in addition to. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's the latter. I mean, for us, a wealth account is not including those 401ks in our retirement accounts. It is its own thing.
So basically it's outside of your retirement accounts. It's really things you can draw down on today, like your after-tax, non-taxable account. Okay.
Yeah. Again, if I thought about myself back in that car picking my husband up with his box, unfathomable, right? Certainly if I think back to my childhood, I think back to being in school, unfathomable, right? But I think the key piece is like, it doesn't have to be everything at once, right? Like this was a journey, a true journey of steps, right? That waking up, that getting out of debt, that saving, that moving towards a smaller goal, right, of just one of us working, and then get really the sense that we could do the whole thing, but it's going to take a significantly larger amount of money. And being able to say, well, how can we do that? Well, what was available to us was to roll the dice and try to build two companies that would enable us to do that.
Yeah, focusing on the income really just turbo boosted your journey. So now that you're FI now, one of the questions that I have is like, and maybe someone else is thinking this, is you like walked away though from both of you to like quit your jobs, quit your companies, walked away from like the continual like amount of income that you would have actively like had. And so you had to be okay with like leaving that money on the table, right? Like it's like, all right, I'm going to walk away from like this well-paying like company because time matters to me more and doing what I want in this capacity matters.
Yeah. And look, just to be perfectly transparent, so my husband didn't just like shut it down. He sold it, right? Which of course just adds gas to an already, if you've already hit your number and then you just put more on top, that's fantastic, right? For me, I hired a CEO of my company to take over. I still earn from that. So, I don't consider it like I'm getting paid to do something, but certainly that is also part of what we bring in. But it just adds on top. So we had an unusual situation in that both of our businesses worked well. Both of them grew. Both of them were profitable. But the walk away part was more about, for me, when I was a professor, I felt like I kind of outgrew the job. It became something that felt more like it was keeping me from growing. But in my business, the business outgrew me because I was the right person to start it. I was the right person to do the kind of foundational work and do the startup phase. But when you start a business and it grows, you also have to know when you've hit the moment where you're actually the thing standing in the way of the business becoming really what it can be. Like, your leadership moment is over. In fact, the organization itself, it needs more. It needs a new person with new skills, and your team, they need a new leader. And so that's not exactly a happy moment for a founder, but you have to be able to say and realize and notice that what's required for the company to keep growing just needs a new skill set that you don't have. And you can choose whether you want to try to acquire it. But in my case, I had built an awesome team, and it was ready for a new leader. So I was happy to find that person, to find just the right person who stepped in and continued to move forward.
And what I admire too is that, when we talk about building an investment account, building a portfolio, and creating passive income, if you're building a business, this would be like a dream to have built a business in a capacity where you still, like, you built a business as part of your portfolio that you don't have to actively work in, but you still are able to profit from. Or in the case of your husband, you build it up to a point where you can sell it and reap the benefits in that regard. So I love that. So now let's talk a little bit about the planning process, because that's one of the things that really drew me to your story, and what I wanted to learn more, and what I wanted you to share is that you guys have a really in-depth annual planning process, like where you look back at what you accomplished, what you're looking forward to doing. You even had a blog post about the whole, how everyone's jumping on the bandwagon of like that word, having a word mantra for their year. And like, I raised my hand, that's me too. But I love how you frame questions around that. So let's first talk about the annual planning process, what that is, like how can someone create that in their own life?
Sure. So, the essence of it is in that moment of, one year flipping to another. Some people, it's around their birthday, but most of us have a moment in a year when we naturally pause, right? We take a step back, we think of our life and what we want to be different in our next year. For us, we took a natural pause around Christmas. And in part, we took that pause because we were so tired of the consumption around Christmas and the excess that we decided to just leave the country every Christmas because we realized that all the money that we were spending on, decorations and gifts and parties and Christmas clothes, we could actually travel for the same amount of money for quite a period of time. So because we left the country during Christmas, we realized this is a natural time of pause. And so all the planning is really giving structure to the pause. It's just asking questions that enable you to look back, to look within, and to look forward, right? So I have all the steps in that particular blog post, and welcome to look at them. But it starts off by looking back at the previous year, looking at, and asking some reflective questions. What worked, what didn't work? Did you meet your goals for the previous year? And if not, why not? Right? Not in a judgmental way, or it's not an invitation to go into self-flagellation. It's just in a way of getting curious, right? If I didn't meet them, why? And really looking at our peak experiences. What happened in the past year that we would qualify as a peak experience? What were our unexpected blessings? And if just taking time to ask those questions, we can start with that because it generates so much positive energy. It generates, when we start talking about our unexpected blessings, we feel so grateful, right? It has this energy of gratitude. And when I think about what I want for my life, and when I think about planning for the future, I want it all to be grounded in that energy of gratitude, right? Because that's when I'm most expansive. That's when I'm most creative. That's when I'm most likely to create things that don't currently exist. So we take a look back at the previous year. And then, we certainly think about what's going to be the framework that we examine our life and plan forward. So most people just think about work, everything else. There's two buckets. Or they think about work and family or work and home. We sort of have a larger set of domains that we look at. So we look at our health, we look at growth, we look at our purpose, we look at relationships, so that we're not just looking in this dichotomous way at our life. And then we really drill down in each of those domains, and we spend time talking about and writing out, like, what do we actually want? So if I think about my health, if I think about my life and I imagine what it looks like in an optimal form, what do I want my physical health to look like? What do I want my emotional health to look like? What do I want my spiritual health to look like, right? And we do the same thing with each of those domains, right? If I think about my purpose, what kind of work do I want to be doing? What do I want my money and my relationship to money to look like? What do I want my legacy to look like? And we just sort of rotate around that framework, but really not saying, what do I want next year to look like? But ideally, what do I want my life to look like in this particular domain? And, it's just about envisioning. And as you can imagine, this can create some interesting conversations because we do this separately and then we share it with each other. And some things are aligned and some things aren't. And it's certainly an interesting thing as a couple to explore why that is. But the point is we really use our kind of creative muscles, right? We try to build out that ability to see what we actually want, to ask ourselves what we deeply desire, not in the context of constraint, right? But if we could have what we wanted, what would it actually look like in detail? And then, ultimately, we take a pause before we go into goal setting to really ask ourselves what would stop us from having what we want. And in our case, certainly there's all the external constraints. There's all of the problems of the world. But for us, we always try to focus on what we have control over. And for us, most of the time, what would stop us is some limiting belief, right? Some idea, something that maybe was true for us in a previous stage that isn't true anymore. And we try to really surface what those limiting beliefs are and really shift them. Really ask ourselves, is that true anymore? Ask ourselves is that belief supporting me and moving forward? And then finally, we just sort of get into the concreteness of, if this is the big thing that I want, if this is ideally what I want my life to look like, what are the specific goals I can have for this year? And it doesn't mean I'm going to go from this moment straight into my optimized life. It means, how can I move forward in this year? What's something concrete that I can set as a goal that's going to help me to move forward towards that? And of course, all the planning in the world is great, but unless you set it into your daily practice, it's really difficult for that to come to life. So for us, we create some affirmations, we pick our one word, and we really use them on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the overview.
Yeah, it sounds like intense, and I'll definitely link this in the show notes. But it's one of those things where too, like, it involves work, and I think for a lot of people, even including myself, it's like you want the outcome of this work, like, so like I just like can I just like fast forward and get like, everything you just said, but you have to do the work. Like, you have to sit down, answer the question, sit down. If you have a partner, do it with them. Even if you have children and they're of age where they can, even if it's like a modified version, you can kind of sit down and do it with them, is important. And so as you're talking, I'm actually thinking, look at you. From what I see, and we didn't get into too many numbers here in this interview, but from what I can tell, you guys are probably living a really comfortable life, and you seem to be very happy. And I think you also say you travel a lot still. Now that you're quote unquote retired now, so you have all the time in the world. Yet you still like sit down every year and to do this planning, you still do these daily mantras. And it seems like what got you here are those actions, but because you got into this place of freedom, you have not stopped. You continue to do it. And I think the biggest gap for a lot of people is we want that life, but the work that it takes the work to do it, and the continual work to do it. And so I like that, it's like you're actually living like that, like you're living that truth of, this is what it takes to keep it up. This is how I got here, but this is what I'm going to keep doing.
Well, it's interesting too, like we've been doing this particular process for 12 years, right? When we started doing it, our life was very different than it is now, right? And your vision grows, your vision expands, your dreams expand, right? But the work to do it is still work. It doesn't matter if it's never just going to happen, right? It's never like magically going to drop in your life. It really is work.
Yeah, I love that. And so, before I let you go, I want to talk about just one other thing that you had that I really enjoyed, and it was something called Joy Habits. And you were able to actually like implement this more in like a daily, like weekly kind of actual like process. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how we can include joy habits in our lives?
Yeah, so for me, I should start by saying I have a bias here that I think joy is different than just happiness, right? Happiness is sort of an emotion. For me, joy is like a state of being, and my bias is I think it's our default state of being, right? It's just that the world's kind of designed to separate us from that, and so if we want to be in that joyful state, if we want to get back to that state of being, for me, I have to do things, right? Because if I'm just sort of living in the world, everything feels designed to separate me from joy. For me, it's like I have to have certain things in my life that remind me that, that really keep me in touch with that reality. Otherwise, I'll just forget. And so we certainly have things we do on a daily basis. We have things we do on a weekly basis. But there are things that help to unplug from everything that's set up to keep us from that, right? So maybe a really simple joy habit is that we love to watch the news, but once it's dinner time, TV's off for the rest of the night. Right? We sit down and look at each other and eat. We have conversation. We read, right? It's really something very simple, but is a powerful kind of just unplugging and an unplugging from all these overwhelming messages about misery. It's also the case that we take a really long walk every Sunday. And we take a long walk, even when it's really cold, in order to have a different type of conversation, right? We call it our crazy talk walk. But it's just a walk where we have one type of conversation, which is, what do we want? How would we serve if we could 10x what we're doing? What needs to shift for us? And again, how would we live if we didn't have any constraints, right? And it's not to dismiss that there aren't constraints in the world and we don't have them. It's an opportunity for us to really build that muscle of envisioning and to say out loud, what do I really want? And oftentimes the best things in our life have come out of those conversations, right? Because when you say to somebody else what you really want and what you would want if you had no constraints, and the other person takes it seriously and starts, there's no judgment allowed, there's no criticism allowed, there's no kind of, let's get real now. The point is it's just a space to walk, keep your body moving so it doesn't get in the way, and just talk about possibilities, right? That's how we built our growth mindset. That's how we built really getting in touch with what we desire. They're just little things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a daily gratitude practice, right? Just taking a pause at the end of the day just to be thankful, right? And we don't have a perfect life. Things go wrong, but reminding ourselves and ruminating on what went well instead of what went wrong, it just shifts our energy, right? And that's the energy that connects us, that opens that door to joy.
Love that. And so my final question for you, I mean, I can talk to you forever, but my final question to you is, what does your life look like now? So now that you're retired and financially independent, what does your husband, what do you do all day? What do you and your husband do?
Well, it's funny because I think people conflate paid employment and work, right? So I think people imagine, I'm going to retire early and I'm never going to work again and everything's going to be easy and we'll sit on a beach and blah, blah, blah. That's really not what it looks like. And, definitely, I think for most people when they retire, there is a honeymoon phase where they, don't have an alarm clock and no structure of the day, and they do whatever they want, and they travel, and there is that honeymoon phase, and everyone who retires should have that, right? But then at a certain point, you have to decide, what is this chapter of my life going to look like? What is my life going to look like? And I think the thing we never want to talk about is that that's kind of work, right? The reality is that for early retirement and, probably for regular retirement, there is work to be done. You have to have a massive shift in your identity, right? And that takes an intentional process. You have to create a new structure for yourself. You have to create community for yourself. You have to really re-engage, redefine what your purpose is and what success looks like for you. And so, maybe the way to say it is like, you have to figure out, what does a meaningful life look like, right? And it's going to involve structure, community, purpose, and dare I say, work. Not the kind of work that you're paid for, but really digging in and doing something meaningful with your life, right? And so, it's kind of funny because people are always like, oh my gosh, what is it like? And I'm like, freedom is awesome. And freedom is also challenging because I don't expect anybody to feel bad for me, but there is a challenge of like, how do I create a meaningful life now that 40, 50, 60 hours a week are no longer filled with work? I no longer go to a place, I no longer have those relationships, and I no longer have that identity. So that's a long way of saying that our daily life probably doesn't look anything like what people imagine. Like, we get up in the morning, we sit down, we both write, so we sit down from 10 to 12 every day and write. And it looks kind of like work, right? It's just, we write and we're not paid for it. We write, my husband is working on a young adult novel. I write for my blog. I do a lot of different types of writing, but we write for 2 hours. We take a walk every day before lunch. We have our lunch at a leisurely pace. And then in the afternoon, we do our own forms of work. Again, it's unpaid labor, but for me, I love to serve as a mentor now. And because I was a successful entrepreneur, I leave time every afternoon for calls with other entrepreneurs. I certainly continue to have a number of leaders across various sectors who want to have a mentoring call, a confidential mentoring call. I love doing that because I can do deep work with people on the phone, and I don't need to charge for it. I don't need to make money from it. I don't have a long-term commitment with these people, but I'm available for that type of work. It is, for me, incredibly meaningful, incredibly fulfilling. It's also the case that I serve on a number of boards. I advise a number of groups. That's the kind of work that I do in the afternoon. In the evening, 4 or 5, it's time for yoga. I'm blessed to have a hot yoga studio right around the corner from my house I can walk to. My husband goes to work out. We have dinner, and we read. It's in the evening. It's just kind of sounds really boring probably to most people. Mm-hmm. But this is what we choose, right? For us, that creating that life of meaning is about having relationships with friends and family. It's about having time for that. It's about having time to give back in ways that are aligned with our gifts and talents. It's about keeping ourselves physically healthy. It's about doing things like cooking, right, that we didn't have time to do when we were both working intensely. It's really, I think what matters for people is to start thinking now about the life part, right? So, with your money or your life, when I read lots of fire blogs, it's all about your money. It's all about the minutiae of detail about your money. And I think we also need to be thinking about the life part, right? Mm-hmm. So we want to be building that before we sort of have this crossover, because if you don't know what a meaningful life looks like, it's not, again, just going to pop out of the sky. It takes work, and it takes work for you to define what it is and to create it for yourself.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And I loved you going into detail about what your day actually looks like. It gives people an idea of like what they can dream of like doing, like if they really had no constraints for time and money. So Kerry Ann, thank you so much for this like wealth of information. Can you please let people know where they can find you if they want to just learn more, read about your blog? You have an Instagram account too, so share that, please.
Yeah, so the blog is thebestchapter.com, and my Instagram is Running Into Fire.
Right, and I will link that again in the episode show notes for this episode. Thank you so much again, Kerry Ann, for coming on the show and sharing your perspective and life story.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
I really hope you enjoyed that insightful conversation with Kerry Ann. I'm really just happy she was able to share her journey with us. Like I mentioned before, it's not too often that we actually get to see someone who's living a life of financial independence, where they have reached their goals, where they are working because they want to and doing the things they love. I mean, wouldn't we all want to do that? And so I thought she gave some amazing tips, amazing things that we can think about, frame our life in a way in which we really start becoming intentional about how we plan and think about our life. So if you want any of the episode show notes, what Kerry Ann talked about, some of the blog posts that we mentioned, go to journeytolaunch.com/episode 80. As I mentioned before, Kerry Ann is going to be joining us in the Launch Club. That's my premier membership community where I'm able to dive into the topics more from the podcast and to have experts come in, teach courses, classes, and where you really get that community and support. So Kerry Ann talked about this in the episode, that community support is important, and that's why I created the Launch Club, so you can have that, so you can have a network supporting you to reach your goals. So later this month, actually, we're going to have a credit expert come in on the podcast. We're going to have Shantae Nicole. Shantae is a credit expert. She was on episode 37. If you want to check that episode out, that's journeytolaunch.com/episode 37. She broke down the basics of credit, how to understand it, how to utilize it, and we're going to dive deeper in that in our masterclass in the Launch Club. So if that sounds like something you need, then come on to the Launch Club. Again, you can join us at journeytolaunch.com/launch club. We're going to be having the credit class later this month, and any of the classes that you can't make live are in the Launch Club for you to watch on your own time. We have the budget boot camp in the Launch Club. We have a past Q&A live guest, Takaya, who's a single mom who went from $100,000 in debt to $500,000 in saving. We have her live show after chat in the Launch Club. So come on, check that out too. If you want to share with me your thoughts on this episode, you can @ me at Journey to Launch, post it on your social media, @ me, let me know what you thought of it, and let's have a conversation. You know, I'm just always excited to bring you this content, to talk to you, to help you on your journey. So until next week, keep on journeying, journeyers.